This lecture is the Digital Present Part 2, and this will actually be the last lecture in this course, and sort of bringing us back to the present. And by the present, it's 2019 was when this book was published, so I'm sure a lot has changed since then. But this will be the final chapter in this book. So we talked about web graphics in part 1, and we started kind of talking about Flash and just how animations were starting to become part of websites. So we're going to get back to the animated graphics for film and television. So as a parallel to the 21st century rise of animation on the internet, graphic designers really entered this parallel field of film and television graphics. The field of television graphics has a longer history than the web, and graphic designers had been making animations for many decades before the invention of the internet. Robert Brownjohn was a prominent graphic designer who dabbled in animated graphics long before the digital revolution. He attended Chicago Bauhaus and collaborated with Ivan Chermayeff and Tom Geismeyer in founding the legendary agency of Brownjohn, Chermayeff, and Geismeyer. He left the firm and moved to England, where he used his fame to launch into the production of animated film titles. So this is a film title that he did for James Bond. It was called From Russia with Love. I think this is one of the ones that I couldn't get, I could find it on YouTube, but for some reason the link wasn't working anymore. If I can get it working again, I'll definitely post it to Blackboard. But what you can't see here is this idea of, you see this woman sort of dancing, and the words and the titles and the credits are kind of flowing over her. But you can kind of see his work being suggested of the psychedelic 60s, and this idea of projected light, which Maholo Nagy had experimented with in the Bauhaus. And it also has really close cropped photography that also resonates with the imagery that was done in the Bauhaus as well. Kyle Cooper is one of the most influential graphic designers working in the field of motion graphics, and he has created over 150 film title sequences over the last decade. And he completed the film title sequence for Spider-Man, the very first one that came out, I think with Tobey Maguire. And he did the opening credits, which feature 2 distinct sequences, a dizzyingly fast strobe light set of comics flashed by the viewer's eyes, which you can actually still see if you watch any of the Marvel streaming, like the series. They still show it today. And then he has a longer sequence of titles that appear as if animated in the style of a cartoon, with this large flat area of color, introducing letters that fashion the credits, that form and reform, seeming to leap from web to web like the protagonist of the film. And this one I do believe will play. Let's see if we can get it. So I will post this one as well. I thought I had it working. But the music also goes really well with the video. So I'm going to try to post this separately. Television networks were also among the most important sources of commissions for designers of motion graphics. The Troika Design Group, they were based in Hollywood, and they were responsible for one of the most familiar set of television motion graphics of the 21st century. And this was their package for SportsCenter. And the ESPN, it was a show on ESPN, and they had this idea of kineticism with sleek textureless surfaces. And they did also, the lettering in the credits were very geometric, flattened curves, orthogonal forms, which are really typical of the genre. And I think this one should hopefully work. Yes.
Is SportsCenter.
Um, these Sports Center graphics were created using a mixture of different software programs. They used After Effects, Autodesk Maya, and Final Cut Pro. And you can really see that the complexity of these programs, there was a great deal of collaboration. So there was probably definitely a team of people working on these. Each member probably having their own software specialty. In 2009, Flash had become so complex that it was killing off a great deal of creativity. Within a year of its dominance, it came under assault by the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, and he did not include the plugin in its mobile devices. So I was correct. When on Apple iPhones, you could not open Flash websites. And because of this, I think really the iPhone and Apple itself really killed Flash, because then what happened is people scrambled to create things for these phones that were like hugely popular and probably one of the most popular phones at the time. And so HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript really displaced Flash, as Flash was not mobile friendly. So in 2010, the shift from Flash to other platforms really represented more of a technological shift rather than a conceptual one for web designers. So it was more about technology, not about what you were creating. So designers no longer saw themselves as making objects, but producing experiences, be that on a computer, a phone, a kiosk, on your watch. So today's design firms really do focus on a multi-layered approach to expressive engagement with the consumer. The TED Conference has proven to be a key venue for designers to explore and learn about the changes that have rocked graphic design in recent years. And I don't know if you've watched any TED Talks, but a lot of them focused on design are really interesting. So Trollback and Company actually created a cinematic opening for TED 2010, which was motivated by experience and feeling, not just about eye candy. And I didn't post that, but you can always look that up. So in today's web studios, the design workforce, whose job it is to engage and retain viewers, now is referred to UX, or user experience, and UI, which is user interface. So UX designers are problem solvers who are channeling this cognitive map of a digital experience into a website. Because initial websites, when they were first designed, they didn't think about how the end user was using their site. They just tried to pack all this information in. So now we're really having users, if they can't find the navigation or can't understand where to go or don't know where to click, it's a whole different set of a knowledge base that you have to think about when you're designing for these new mobile and web devices. So the example of this complexity now that's happening in today's design is a campaign that Trollbank and Company built for Spotify. They created a new brand identity, colorful abstract motion graphics. They had animated shorts, advertisements, billboards, and other things in order to entice new customers. So this is an example. It probably doesn't look like this anymore at all. Again, things change so quickly. But, when they created this idea of their branding, they had to think about, how is this going to work on the web? How is this going to look on a website? How is this going to look on a tablet? And you kind of introduces this idea of responsive design. And it's not just commercial companies like Spotify that had to have complex interactive campaigns. A lot of museums relied on digital designers to fashion their image and enhance the experience of visiting the museum. I think even the Cleveland Museum of Art has in one of their rooms a big screen, a big touch screen where you can touch it and learn more information about the exhibits and the art pieces and all that kind of stuff. So the digital age really expanded the need for designers who had mastered the art of visualizing complex amount of information. So wayfinding an airport, data visualization is associated with practical applications, but also were used to entertain and engage. At the 2013 US Open, the Buck Studio collaborated with IBM and Ogilvy and Mather to create a live data flow of the play-by-play action on the courts. And you can see this here, and it was really utilized to be built on Instagram, and it was called Datagrams. So it featured colorful animated charts that updated the viewer and entertained them with playful graphics. And this is just a screen grab from up here, but you can see the players, their score, and just really, thinking about design, thinking about color, still making it attractive even though it's being viewed on a little screen. And the Apple Watch, which was introduced in 2015, collects and communicates data on the smallest of digital platforms. It really, this idea of data visualization, if you think of your heartbeat, they have like pulse ox. I think they have oxygen meters now. So it really meets this age-old human desire to feel the illusion of understanding and control over our lives and bodies. And because the field of design has witnessed such a technological change, the field of type design also kind of had to follow this as well. So there was a bunch of new typefaces that were designed that allowed a degree of precision that didn't really exist previously. So this idea of web fonts and variable type brought new flexibility and cohesiveness to the field. So if you think about, there's a whole science behind type on a screen that is different than type on a page and how our eyes read things differently. So the profession of type design is also facing some of the same challenges that occurred in the 19th century with the new technology that allowed the work of less than good quality side by side with some of the most amazing type created since Gutenberg's time. And really, the idea of digital type design, now you have Adobe fonts and Google fonts, and type designers are licensing their typefaces to be available for free to the user, but kind of like almost like Spotify with music and Apple Music and all those different kind of things. So the most commercial fonts are released in OpenType today because before there were, and if you're a Mac user or a PC user, or if you use both, you know that some typefaces would open on Macs, some typefaces wouldn't, and they would only open on PCs. But in this day and age, OpenType can be opened on both platforms. Very flexible. Fontographer, Adobe Illustrator, and FontLab really allowed designers to use vector graphics that they could draw refined typefaces from scratch, as well as to make subtle changes to existing fonts. Eric Spiekermann is a German type designer who created one of the most influential type superfamilies with the release of FF Meta. So you can see here that it's a humanist sans serif. It with sort of a little bit of that little, you can see kind of that little curve on the serif of the A. It was really intended to provide a more lively alternative, to be less expressive, such as Helvetica and Ascaden's Grotesque. If you watch the Helvetica movie, you will see him, and he has a very strong hatred of Helvetica. So him and his wife founded Font Shop, which is a new digital type firm that rose to act as a clearinghouses for new fonts. Like Emigre and Bitstream, Font Shop was a publisher of new fonts, not necessarily a type design firm. So this is a typeface called FF Scala, and it was released by Dutch designer Martin Major. And it was really a refined serif typeface that was really durable over the years, and he created a sans serif version as well. And his motto was 2 typefaces, 1 firm principle, the serif version and the sans serif version coming from the same source. This idea, and you'll learn this in later classes, especially for publication design or book design, a lot of times designers will try to find 2 complementary typefaces, 1 serif, 1 sans serif. So this typeface was designed to immediately complement each other. So as digital type came into the mainstream, Adobe asserted itself into the arena with Adobe Originals family of fonts, starting in 1989. They released Myriad, which was hugely successful as their sans serif, and then Meta and Frutiger all had the same intention, which was bringing a measure of soulfulness to the sans serif genre. So nowadays we are bombarded with serifs and sans serifs and what is good and what is not good. We all find our favorites. We'll kind of go over this a lot when you get to type 1. But really just, this really enabled designers to give type designers to give other designers a lot of really fun options to work with. In 1996, Microsoft released Verdana and Georgia, which were both designed by Matthew Carter. And they were important. They were like the important that they were the first generation of screen fonts. Verdana is a sans serif, and Georgia was a serif. They were created to function very well on computer screens and had a perceived advantage over greater legibility at low resolutions. And both typefaces I'm sure you have encountered, and maybe even not knowing you're encountering them. Jonathan Heffler founded his own type foundry in 1989 to market his work directly to the public. So you're going to find today there's a lot of very cool independent type foundries creating their own typefaces. And his fame in the design community came less from the creation of experimental fonts than through his consistent work on behalf of his clients. So he designed Heffler Text, which was really one of the newest of the breeds of refined digital serif faces, and I think it's actually installed on all Macintosh computers. And it was really part of their Macintosh's True Type project. And it was introduced in their operating system in 1994, and it's still on our computers today. And this is the typeface. And it's just an alternative to Times New Roman. I think if you compared the two side to side, like, Coke and Pepsi, would people be able to tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi? And some might, but I think kind of the same thing here. But if you were to ask me, I would probably pick Heffler Text over Times New Roman, just because I think I like the fact that a designer designed it, and it just seems to me to be a lot more graceful and beautiful. He designed the typeface called Gotham for the Obama campaign in 2000. It was used by their presidential campaign. It's really become a very popular sans serif typeface, and it's was inspired by the lettering of the New York City signage. So there has also been an explosion in the number of experimental typeface designs. Neville Brody designed a number of such fonts for FSI, which is Font Shop, including Blur, which was sort of a response to the international style. And this is his typeface Blur. So he kind of transformed Helvetica into a hazy form by manipulating it with Photoshop. And so, you would type it out and it would look like this, and you would think something's wrong with your machine or something's wrong with my screen. Definitely Brody, you can tell from the 1990s, he was more of the grunge type. So this definitely fits in with that. And this is a typeface called Not Caslon, designed by Mark Anderson. And what was really interesting is when Adobe began reviving a series of historical faces like Garamond, Caslon, other designers were kind of going against that. And this is considered to be an amusing anti-historicist font. And, you can see it's kind of taken Caslon and just stretched out those anchor points and added flourishes and sort of made it to the point, this is sort of definitely a display typeface, still kind of looking pretty grungy. So it's sort of a Frankenstein monster of a font. This is a really cool typeface designed by Eric Van Blokland, and it's called FF Cosmic. And what's really cool about this is because of the idea that it's digital, this kind of, he was exploring changeability. So this is called a flipper font, in which each letter of the typeface has 3 different versions, which are sequentially employed by the program. So, you might type and then Apple, and you might get 2 different A's, which is really cool. This is another typeface designed by Matthew Carter, and this is called Walker. And he created this for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. So you'll see, and if you're looking around, Huggies diapers. Huggies has its own typeface called Huggies. John Deere has its own typeface. The Marlboro, I can never say that word. Marlboro has a typeface that they use for all of their branding. And the typefaces are named by the brand, which is really interesting. So what he did with this typeface is it's sort of like cosmic, in which you can snap on different serifs to create different styles. So the museum's designers could choose the preferred version of the typeface for a given application. So you've got you have the typical sans serif with just, straight stems and no real terminals. But then you could have the option of the slab, the sort of triangular Tuscan serifs, serifs with more brackets, serifs with just lines. So this was a really cool typeface that had a lot of different opportunities for expansion and exploration. Typotech in the Netherlands was another influential type foundry, and they created a lot of typefaces, including this one called Brioni, which was a calligraphic slab serif. And you can see that there's lots of different variants. So they've got small caps, regular, italic, medium, bold. So you're starting to see a lot of typefaces with a lot of different weights. And this really helps with visual hierarchy. You'll hear this from your professors at Youngstown as you move along with the program. You don't want to work with just one typeface weight. Sometimes instead of picking two different typefaces for a publication, if you pick a typeface that has a lot of different weights, it just gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more ways to do different things with your work. So a great example of what can go wrong with new digital age of type was a case of New York's Museum of Modern Art. So in 1964, Ivan Chermayeff replaced the geometric style of lettering that was on the former logo with Morris Fuller Benton's sans serif Franklin Gothic. However, in the 80s, the administration recognized that they wanted to change their logo to MOMA, which was a better, with a smaller lowercase o, so Museum of Modern Art. So they planned an updated look to correspond with the 2005 opening of their new building. What a lot of early digital designers did was they would take the old metal type or even wood type and create digital versions. But the current digitization of Franklin Gothic had imperfect proportions, because really you're just digitizing type that had been carved sometimes by hand into metal. So some of the characters might be a little different, the weights might be a little strange. So to order a new, better copy of Franklin Gothic from Matthew Carter, he really had to tweak the proportions of many of the letters to return the face back to its original, elegant, balanced state. So he found sets of Franklin Gothic metal type and used it to scan it to get a better sense of the proper proportions. And this is kind of what he came up with. And this is the logo for MoMA in 2003. So this is actually the last slide of the lecture. The last lecture of the course. Again, I will post, Steve Esclison has released a new book in 2023 called I think it's called The Digital Present, so that kind of, obviously between 2019 when this was published and 2025, which we are today, a lot of different things have happened. It's really hard with history to kind of keep everything current, but I think this at least gets you to a good point. Hopefully you've learned a lot. And if you did want more information about the history of design as it appears more currently, definitely get that book, because it's really interesting. So I hope you've enjoyed these lectures, and hopefully we'll see you in future classes at YSU.